Navarro-Lopez on it? Is it on? Hello? Hello? Ah, good. It's teamwork. Teamwork. This one's not working either here. Okay, so my name's Bev Bachmeyer, and I'm co-chair of the conference. And I wanted to explain to you about the red chair that you've seen us carrying around and sitting in. So the red chair is symbolic for a campaign called Sit With Me. And the idea is, there it is, Valerie's holding it for you. So the idea is that we use, it's a symbolic of the ability to gain visibility for women in computer science and women in computing. So the idea is you sit in the chair and you talk about being a woman in computer science.
Or
so,
you can do other things with the chair.
Yeah.
You can do...
Yeah. Okay, so the idea is the Sit With Me campaign is a campaign where they take pictures of the people sitting in the chair, and we put it onto a website. So, and there you can see the stories of women in computer science or computing. That's the idea. Anything else? No, that's very good. Okay. I'm going to put this one down because it obviously does not work. Yeah. There is a link on the conference website, and it's actually in the program link on the left-hand side under the unconference and the career fair and the program. It's right there. And you can read about Sit With Me, and there's a link where you can
One, two.
to... Thank you. You are here? Where? Here? Yeah? I guess I'm... Oh? Okay. Okay, so now that we all understand, everyone understands about Sit With Me, right? Okay, you can look at it on the website. Okay, so right now we are about 5 minutes after our scheduled time. We are going to hear 2 technical talks and then do the unconference. And our first technical talk is by Carole Goble called Helping Scientists Do Science. Now, Carole is actually a professor of computer science here at Manchester. And she manages a group which is a mixture of computer science researchers and software engineering and scientific informatics. Yes. So she is also a fellow of the Royal, I can't read it.
You can't read your writing?
I can't read my writing. The Royal Academy of Engineering and a fellow of the British Computer Society. But she was recently awarded the Commander of the Order of the British Empire. And like Wendy, she gets to meet the Queen in April. Yes. And Carole is also is the actual original founder of Women in Computing group in 1988. Yeah. And she actually ran a couple conferences then, and she ran a schoolgirls workshop from 1980 to 1990, and she's a very, very good advocate of women in computing. Carole?
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we'll just flip to my talk. It won't be that long, don't worry. Okay. So I've been asked to give a technical talk after lunch on a Saturday. Ugh. So it's not going to be that technical, folks. What I wanted to do was tell you a little bit about me helping scientists do science. Originally, I wrote an abstract as confessions from an applied computer scientist. When I came to write the talk, I realized you wouldn't understand why I was confessing in a shortish talk because it took a long time to set it up. So I'm going to give some examples from an applied computer scientist working with scientists and working with a very large team called the MyGrid team, a project that was an e-science project set up in 2000. I've been working with scientists as a computer scientist for 20-odd years. It's a big team. I have about, in Manchester, I have 15 postdocs and a large number of postgraduate students, and then I have a bunch of other collaborators across the world. So what do I want to talk about? I want to talk about e-science, computational science, scientific computing, whatever these words mean to you. Basically, how do I use computing, technologies, techniques, innovations, research in order to support scientific collaboration, to enable resource sharing, to help scientific processing, to accelerate scientific discovery, provide better scientific productivity, and cope with the scales of data and the movement towards computational science, so using algorithms to do simulations, to have large-scale data analysis that we now find in the scientific community. And so the so-called fourth paradigm, where we're bringing together this sort of vast amount of data over many different collaborative spaces, many different resources, in order to be able to help scientific discovery. Now, I want to ground it a bit more in the projects that I've been associated with. So I've been working in the last 10 years in projects in drug discovery, physiology, astronomy, systems biology, next-gen sequencing for microbiology, and things like biodiversity. In fact, one I'm going to choose to talk about particularly as a sort of example is biodiversity, because it's cute, it's animals, it's fluffy things, whereas nobody gets really excited by ordinary differential equations to model metabolic pathways. I don't think you would after lunch. So I've chose crabs, actually, to talk about, but that's another story. So the technical aspects, that's the scientific problems that I've been dealing with, but the computing that I want to run through in this talk are three kinds: distributed computing, knowledge computing, and social computing. So distributed computing is about linking up different distributed codes and resources and platforms and the infrastructures. Knowledge computing is about describing and finding and linking up data and models through descriptions. And social computing is how do we get scientists to collaborate and share their results and support collaborations, dynamic collaborations, global collaborations between scientists. And I also bring a little bit about how we get developers to work with scientists together in that aspect as well. So this is the world I live in. And it's quite a complicated and unusual world for a computer science professor, because it has computer science at one end, but it has software engineering at the other end. As was mentioned in the introduction, actually 2/3 of my team at Manchester are bona fide software engineers. They are not computer science researchers. They build things, because if scientists are going to use something, they need it to work. So because they need it to work today, tomorrow, because they're interested in the science. So we need to bleed together computer science innovations, apply it through use cases, if you like, but bring it to product in practice. And I'll be mentioning several of the products that we built that are all open source and all openly available. And this is quite a complicated social environment, because it's not just research, it's engineering, and it's also computational scientific informatics, people who bridge between computer science, between software and data to the science itself. So it's a complicated story. But let's go to crabs. So this is Sarah Bullitt, who's my colleague, who's based in Gothenburg, and she's an environmental biologist, and she's interested in population modeling of marine animals, particularly looking at ecological niche modeling, looking at the migration of invasive species throughout the Baltic and through the oceans, in order to make recommendations for government policy. So she's interested in crabs like this. It's data-intensive science, as I'll show you briefly, and collaborative science. And she wants to plot what are the occurrences that she's seeing on in the Baltic, and what are the prediction to run predictive models in order to predict on current data and current predictions where crabs will migrate. So this is a result of using one of our portals that we've built using our infrastructure. She does ecological niche modeling, sets up layers, sets up the models, does rock curves, does plotting. Can anybody guess what's actually happening here? This is where the kind of incidences of invasive species who should not be in the Baltic actually appearing. Does anybody want to guess what that pattern is actually? No? There are crabs in the wrong places. Why are the crabs in the wrong places? Shipping lanes. Shipping lanes, because the crabs are taken on in ballast water, in ships, they travel, and then they're discharged in that ballast water in alien places, and they discharge the invasive species that then take over the native species. So you can model that, and that's what they've discovered using these tools. So to do that, she needs to collect together data in various different databases, she's interested in lots of different invasive species, because a collection of species will also tell you what's really going on, not just the individual one. So she has lots of different resources. So there are lots and lots of different data sets, and this is true in all of science. So now we're collecting occurrence data, we're collecting other scientific data, and we have to stitch it together. We have to link it together, and of course, none of it was designed to be linked together, which is what's fun about eScience. It's a complete mess. So everything mismatches. The data sets don't match up. The way you access them doesn't match up. The way they're managed doesn't match up. It's great. There's also lots of different software. So I'm sure we've had this experience. You can download our code from the URL supplied. Good luck downloading the only postdoc who can get it to run. So this is Overly Honest Methods. Has anybody been to Overly Honest Methods tweet forum? Yeah, it's awesome. And it's true. So this is where people really say what they're really doing in their laboratories. And this includes using other people's software. So Sarah uses a piece of software called Open Modeler that she did not build. She wants to use it as a modeler, but she's not the developer of the software, and it's hard to use. So this is an aside. Many of these softwares that we deal with are hard to use because they've been developed by what might be called researcher developers, i.e. people with no software engineering skills at all. They started off as computational chemists or biodiversity people, and they ended up building R scripts and various other pieces of software. So in a survey for Nature, 45% of scientists surveyed said that they spent more time developing software than they did 5 years ago, but only 34% think any formal training in developing software is important. And only 47% have any idea about software testing. So I've been in meetings with people with biodiversity, really good researchers who do lots and lots of programming, and in a cohort of about 50, one knew about parameterization, and one knew about the concept of versioning. Woo! So there we are. So we've got some way to deal, and so what we're trying to deal with in our group is to improve software for science. If you have better software, you have better research. We have a chance of actually being able to make that code be used by somebody else, and also to stand up to scrutiny. So we have the Software Sustainability Institute, which I'm part of, Software Carpentry, which is an international initiative to train research developers in science, the basics of software engineering. And we have 2 people here today from the Software Sustainability Institute. Stand up, guys. Where are you? Yeah. Okay. And you can see them for the wonderful T-shirts. Okay? See them for the T-shirts. And we've actually, in honor of this conference, we've just put up a blog about being a creative and shaping the world, woman in software, done by Kat DeRohr, which is a great blog. Back to the crabs. So what's actually Sarah doing? She's doing data collection, which often means going out. It's not necessarily collecting the samples, although it does include that, but mining from the data resources. She's doing data discovery from those data collections. She's cleaning the data because the data is generally pretty crappy, tidy, or the wrong specimen names are allocated. You find, in some of the others, polar bears in the middle of Arabia because there was a zoo that had a polar bear. It's not a clean data set, that kind of thing. She then does the modeling, which is a statistical, highly compute-intensive process. She gets some insights and she writes a paper and she becomes promoted. She's using different data sets. She's using her own data, which is on a stick or on a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets are the Lord's work for scientists. So Google Refine, which is now called Open Refine, is widely used for data cleaning scientific data. And she could be using cloud computing and all sorts of other things. What's important about this is it's lots of volume, lots of variety, lots of repetitive stepping. She has to go through this over and over and over again. She has to, because if these data sets change, she wants to change the model. She wants to sweep through various different parameterizations of the model. So this is a series of steps that she wants to repeat over and over and used to do by hand or do by arbitrary scripts. So what we've been developing and what the community has been developing is the first bit of distributed computing, which is workflow systems. So workflow systems are software systems that enable you to be able to stitch together alien codes and orchestrate them into multi-step processes. So this is the Taverna workflow system that I've built, but there are many different workflow systems. So basically every step is a call to a code. It could be a third-party code hosted somewhere remotely. It could be something on your local disk. And because these are declarative descriptions, you're able to understand them, look at them, record exactly what was being said. So they're good recording devices, and they handle all the shit. That's basically it. They shield you from operational complexity, which is the correct way of saying it, but basically they hide all the shit. And it packages up all of the dependencies as well. So this is actually how large-scale science is now done because of these regular computational practices. Yeah, so it's hiding the crap. So what you want is this kind of potato peeler vision, and actually underneath all of this is happening. So we're pedaling furiously, shielding you from the different infrastructures that you're using. So what does this mean for computer science and for software engineering? Well, in computer science, there's a whole stack of stuff around these kind of workflow systems, putting together these pushing together third-party services or third-party codes, managing that whole process. Visual programming. Actually, the Taverna system, which I've built, is based on a computational lambda calculus with a structured monad associated with it. I'm sure you knew that. Cloud computing, all this kind of stuff. And what we've built are tools, services and standards associated with it. So on the one side we've got the computer science theory, and on the other side we've got the actual software that we built, and things like catalogues of web services that serve the life sciences of the biodiversity world, and standards for describing particularly provenance. So one of the big issues that has not been addressed properly in this community is that, so there's many different issues that are to be addressed, particularly things like frailty of the infrastructures, database changes, piece of code changes, doesn't work anymore. But provenance is one of the great unaddressed or weakly addressed issues. So I thought I'd tell you what provenance is so you could all join me in trying to improve the situation for provenance. So this is provenance. It's what did you do? It's the history of things. So how many have got their file stores just look like this? With, I know, mine does. It's crap, isn't it? So you try to find something, and then somebody says, what did you do? I don't know. I'm lost. So provenance is actually really important from the point of view of scientific processing, because it's to do with evidence. So Sarah wrote this workflow. She runs it hundreds and hundreds of times, different data sets, different parameters, different configurations, and then she picks out the best results that she wants to compare. What did she do? Which algorithm did she use? How did she set up the simulation? How did she clean the data? If you don't report this, then you're not reporting what you actually did. And I'm afraid to say, in most science, we don't report what we actually did. The vast majority of computational science is inherently unreproducible because we don't actually report it. So provenance is the systematic collection of it, tracing the lineage of where did data come from and linking the results and the computation together for transparent research so that you can see that there is a difference between two different traces. Now in computer science, this is a multidisciplinary difficulty. Provenance has to do with the theory of computation, it has to do with being able to understand verification and correctness of programs, it has to do with databases, it also has to do with social issues. I'll mention that a bit later on. So if you're interested in research in e-science and you're interested in being able to improve the quality of scientific reporting, provenance is a really good area to work in, and this year is Provenance Week, which is in June in Cologne, where all the researchers come together. So I have been doing some research in that area, and in particular, Pinar and Sarah are colleagues of mine. Pinar's my PhD student, and we're trying to bridge the gap between being able to collect absolutely everything, which is easy, which is what computer people do, and assuming that I can just present a very complex collection of every event I ever generated from an execution and give it as a graph to a scientist, no. And that everything is a white box, everything is exposed to really what scientists really want to know, which is who do I cite, what did I do, and how did I deal with these codes, alien codes that I'll be calling that actually are black boxes. And so they're dealing with this idea of how do I do distillations and summarizations of provenance. But the point here is that this is a field that has very strong leadership with women. So Juliana Freya and Susan Davison, for example, are leaders in this particular field. So it's a really active field of research where women are very much taking a leadership role. So this leads me to the second point, which is method. So those codes, those workflows, those scripts, as it were, they are commodities in their own right. They're things that I should be publishing and sharing because they're know-how. And I need to know how do I get hold of them, how does it work, what are the assumptions underlying them. So the method, it's not just data that we're sharing in science, we have to share method as well. What were the processes that we did? So in our social computing area, we've been developing systems to help people share methods. So we built something called My Experiment, supported by Microsoft, to explore using online web services, online web environments, to not share pictures of cats, which is fine, of course, but to share pictures of workflows, or in fact, just to share workflows. And in fact, to do more than that, to share and interlink methods and models and data. So this is a system that we've also built for sharing systems biology, data, models, methods, articles, and so on, for very large-scale data collaborations or systems biology collaborations with multiple partners in multiple countries, experimentalists and modelers working together. So, so this brings me to the social piece. So when you've worked in e-science, you're always working in teams, more or less. Teams of scientists, teams of engineers, teams of developers, teams of librarians and curators looking after these things that are being generated by the scientists. And effectively, you're working in an ecosystem. And you really have to understand, I think this was mentioned by Wendy, how people work together. So it's important to understand the social context as well as the technical context. So this is my second piece, the social computation. How do we get people to collaborate? When we're building these sharing platforms and exchange platforms and collaboration platforms, how do we get them used? So I thought I'd slip this one in. There is another piece of collaboration, which is how do you get developers and scientists to work together? And there is this bit of a tension because our developers always want to develop a generic system to pass arbitrary condiments, and our scientists just want the salt. And this is a real challenge to do with when you're balancing innovation with usefulness. Because our scientists will always say, oh, just hack that together for me now. And we know long term, hacking together isn't going to work, but they need to get the paper out to nature. So we have to balance this situation. Back to the sharing. So what we're trying to do is move knowledge between different laboratories and shorten the distance between that knowledge sharing, because if we shorten the distance, we can accelerate the knowledge discovery. So I've built several systems. Again, theory, human factors, security, knowledge management, distributed computing, social science. So this has a very strong amount of research or fundamental theory associated with computing, but also developing platforms and services, developing standards, and developing practices and policies. So we have to balance these two, and as we build things, that inspires research, and as we do research, that inspires the building of the things. So here's the fundamental dirty secret of global scientific collaboration. Scientists don't share. They would rather share their toothbrush than they would share their data. So they share strategically and they share sparingly. So they share depending on whether they're going to get something back. So they have effectively this sharing creep. They hug their data because they think their data is valuable to them, because that's where they're going to get all their papers out. In fact, when they do more than that. They don't hug data, they flirt with data. So they publish data in papers, they put it in a repository with only just enough description to make it interesting, but not enough to use it, because you're going to have to take them on a date if you want to use it, and put them on your paper. And that sort of thing. There's data voyeurism as well, where you want to use everybody else's data, but you don't actually want to get involved. So these are other issues. And this is because scientists are collaborating to compete. So this is a very strange setup. And we have to understand the costs and rewards and risks of sharing hard-won data that represents your scientific value. So this means that when I've realized, I've evolved to be, I started off as a computer scientist, I've actually turned massively into a software engineer because I'm interested in building things and bringing them in. But I've done an awful lot of social engineering, which is when I'm building these systems, how do we build them so that people will actually use them and will be supported and feel safe to collaborate and feel safe to share their data. So here's one more area that you should work in if you're interested in working in with scientists. The big problem is credit. Credit in science is almost entirely through publications. And we need to make credit a lot more pervasive than that. We need to give credit for building software. We need to have credit for being able to share software. We need credit for being able to share data and make data usable by other people. And for credit, we need to have things like universal identity, inter-platform tracking, auto-tracking, so we can see if we give an ID to something, what's happening with it, who's using it, automatically infer that people have used certain data sets and therefore there should be credit. So this is all part of the alt metrics, giving things identifiers, and changing the way we reward science. And there's a whole plethora of very influential women in this particular area, like Caitlin Thenne, who's running science at Mozilla Science, Anita Devada, Elsevier, Heather Puwawa from Impact Story. This is a big deal. The third area was semantic technologies, and the semantic web, if you will, that Wendy mentioned in her talk. You need to be able to describe your data or your methods or your models or your services or your codes well enough that you can, when you share it, somebody else can find it and understand it and reuse it and combine it with other things. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of tins with no labels on. You don't know what's inside, you don't know how to combine it. So this is my third area, knowledge computation. How do we accurately and intelligibly and comparably describe things, interoperate the data, link the data, and make it machine readable? And there's been an entire world of computer science here around ontologies, linked data, data schema. So the semantic web world has developed this notion of you have a model, which they call an ontology, and you have data, and you can describe and interlink this data from various different resources in terms of common concepts and relationships and IDs, and then you'll be able to cross-link it, describe it, infer things from it, because you're sharing terms, you're sharing relationships, you're sharing the nomenclature that you use to describe the data. And if everybody shares the same thing, you'll be able to search and combine it and link it together, won't you? That'll be great. I mean, we have thousands of data sets in biology, and we have about 250 ontologies routinely used, for example, in molecular biology. Sadly, only about 20% of the databases actually use them, so that's a bit of a problem. So here's an example. This is the environment ontology for our crabs. So it's their hierarchies, and they've got descriptions associated with them and an ID. And this ID appears in a data set. It's labeling a data set with that concept. And it allows you to therefore index that data set and link it to other data sets by the same description embedded in the data collection. So what did computer science do for all of this? Well, it invented ontology languages. As Wendy said, it did all that AI woo-woo. I didn't quite say that, but close. And here's some AI woo-woo, some description logic. Lots and lots of collaborators. Some of these people are at Manchester, and these people are elsewhere. These are real leaders of the development of using these languages. So we can describe anything you like in these logics. And so we've done all sorts of things in computing here, and we built all sorts of resources and built all sorts of standards based on logics and models. And we built knowledge bases of, for example, chemistry, which is what this one is, which I've been associated with. What we haven't got is any really good way of adding the semantics to the data. So we've got lots and lots of data, and we've got lots and lots of ways of representing ontologies and models, and then a miracle ensues where we combine the two together. And we can try to do some of that automatically, or we can try, and some of it we have to do manually, because the scientists are collecting the data and making that observation data themselves. So how do we get scientists to use elaborate, complex ontologies based in description logics? Any ideas? Spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are the Lord's work, remember? So what you do is you smuggle in ontologies into spreadsheets so that you think you're just using a drop-down box when you're adding in your data, and you're not. You're actually using an ontological term defined by a collection of scientists who've decided that this is the term that we're going to use for that particular marine environment. And these tools, by actually doing a little bit of software engineering, finding what is the tool that you really need, and then instrumenting that, made suddenly an opportunity for people to collect data. So this is really where the computer science researchers, I had terrible trouble persuading them this was a good idea, because it's, quotes, boring. It's not. It's actually impact. This is actually what we're doing. We're finding ways of being able to use software engineering techniques and use tools that people already use in order to be able to move this research into practice. And Katie Wollstonecraft designed this and developed this, and it's brilliant. So my final piece then is going back to bringing these three things together: semantics, distributed computing, and the social computing. So how science goes wrong. Science is not reproducible at the moment. And science goes wrong because there aren't enough descriptions to describe actually what's in the paper, what the data is in the paper. It's not open and available because it's not being shared very well. And the method that you actually used is 3 lines written in the abstract with, you can download the software from here, oh dear, URL 404. So this is the current state of play we have in science. And the journals and the funding councils have recognized this. We want to move much more to reproducible, exchangeable, and reusable research and results. We want things born reproducible rather than made retrospectively reproducible. So several journals now are forcing the collection of data and much more elaborate descriptions. So to do this, we're not really interested in papers anymore. We're interested in research objects. So we shouldn't be publishing papers. We could publish papers as well. They're the useful narrative. We're used to reading papers. But we should be publishing bundles of results, bundles of data, bundles of software, which we can release and exchange. So the notion of an object of research that is evolving, that is interlinked, rather than a piece of PDF with the table is the data, and you have to scan the table in again in order to recover the data, which is the current state of the art. And Juin Zhao is leading, she's an ex-PhD student of mine, she's now at Lancaster University as a lecturer. She's leading an initiative with that with several publishing houses. And this leads to my final point, that we're mainly software people here, but there's a big move now, particularly through an organisation called Force 11, which is kind of trying to change the way we do research, to think of research not as documents that we publish as papers, but as software. So when we release software, we expect it to change, and we expect it to fork, and we expect it to be merged, and we expect to be able to manage all of that process. And we have release notes, and we have it based on several other kind of libraries, which are then based on libraries. So we expect this to be the way the software is, and software practices are based around that. And that's what research is like too. So we should stop using the model of publish a book, which is then fixed for research, and we should start thinking about publishing our research as if it was software. And this is, I think, going to be a new movement in the publishing houses. So here's my last slide. So Karen Spark-Jones is a very famous computer scientist in the UK. She was a text miner and text understanding person. And she was at the very first Grace Hopper conference, because I saw her there and she gave a great talk. And she recently died, and we have a BCS, British Computer Society, lecture in her honour. And she said, to be a proper professional, you need to think about the context and motivation and justifications of what you're doing. Once you see how important computing is for life, you can't just leave it as a blank box and assume somebody reasonably competent and relatively benign will do something right with it. So the reason I'm in e-science is because as a professional, I saw that computing was important for science, and I wanted to be part of it and intervene in it and make it better, rather than to just leave it in the state that it is, where software is not sustained, people can't use the codes that they want to be able to use, data is not available, science is not reproducible. And I hope that at least 2 or 3 of you will join me in that voyage, because I'm getting old and I need some new people to take on the banner. So thank you very much.
I wonder. We have time for one question, so.
I have stickers if people want stickers.
I can bring you.
Sorry, it's not the way.
Hello.
Hello.
I had a question that, don't you think that a PhD should be like this? Should be a bundle with not only handovers a thesis, rather a thesis with full research value, in the sense that with full data with it, with software with it, with tools used with it, and the full thing should be evaluated and full thing should be used as for promoting the PhD student towards a doctorate.
Yeah. So we've developed this idea with particularly astronomers and life scientists, and this is exactly what their point is, that they get PhDs who come along, do a great PhD, and then they go, and nobody knows where anything is anymore. The data is on a USB stick. The software, they don't even know where the software is. They don't know what the libraries are that they used. It's completely, they start again. So the PhD starts again. They do another year of rebuilding it all. And that's small in a lab, a PhD lab, but it's writ large across all of science. And this is a massive kind of wasted opportunity. But it's challenging because technically you can see how to do it. It's still challenging, but nonetheless you can do it. But it's socially is a big cultural change. It's a big cultural change in science. That's why we have to do the social combined with the technical.
Thank you, Carole. Are we on? Oh, she's going. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Carole. So, as we're getting set up here, the next speaker is Yasmin Altun. Yeah. Are we ready?